Bank humiliates black girl trying to deposit money. Turns pale on learning her father owns the bank. Emily Johnson, a poised 14-year-old clad in her crisp private school uniform, stepped into the Grand Hancock Trust Bank that morning with a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet determination. She had come with a simple purpose: to deposit her well-earned $5 academic scholarship check. A testament to her unwavering dedication and stellar performance in school. Yet, from the moment she approached the teller's window, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The bank teller's polite veneer cracked as her eyes narrowed suspiciously at the sizable check and then darted to Emily, her gaze laced with disbelief. Without warning, the branch manager, Victoria Reynolds, emerged, her presence commanding the room as sharply as the click of her designer heels on the polished marble floors. With an icy glare that sliced through the crowd, Victoria dismissed Emily's explanation, her voice dripping with condescension as she questioned the legitimacy of the scholarship and, implicitly, the girl herself. "We've been seeing far too many fraudulent checks from people like you lately," she sneered, the emphasis on "people like you" hanging heavy with unspoken prejudice. In that instant, Emily's straightforward visit transformed into a public spectacle of humiliation. She was ordered to surrender every document, her school ID, bank card, and the award letter, only to be left standing, vulnerable and exposed, in a cold corner far from the exit. The security guard's grip on her arm tightened as he escorted her across the gleaming floor, the stares and whispers of the affluent clientele magnifying her isolation, despite the stifling heat of shame burning on her cheeks and the pounding of her heart. Emily's voice remained steady as she pleaded simply to be allowed to complete her deposit and call her father, who awaited her home. Yet Victoria, unmoved and remorseless, brushed past her like a shadow, her dismissive words echoing with finality, "That's not our problem." Hours stretched endlessly as Emily was confined in that corner, her documents held hostage. While the bank continued to buzz with customers treated with courtesy she was cruelly denied. The contrast was stark, undeniable. Whites were ushered to priority service lounges, their transactions expedited with smiles and refreshments, while Emily's existence was reduced to an inconvenient interruption, a reminder of unwelcome difference in a place that prided itself on exclusivity. In that suffocating moment, beneath the gleaming chandeliers and beneath the indifference of those around her, a fierce ember of resolve began to kindle inside Emily Johnson, a resolve born not from privilege or power, but from the raw injustice of a young girl forced to stand alone, silenced and scrutinized, in the heart of an institution that was supposed to serve her. Behind the cold marble walls of Hancock Trust Bank and the polished veneer of its exclusive clientele lay a world very different from the one Emily Johnson inhabited. At home, nestled in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods of Oak Ridge, her family's residence was a sanctuary of warmth, intellect, and quiet strength, a stark contrast to the harshness she faced that day. Dr. Michael Johnson, her father, was not just a man of wealth but a titan of finance and community advocacy. A self-made expert whose empire was built on principles far deeper than profit margins. His philosophy was clear. True wealth was measured not in possessions but in the empowerment of people, in nurturing potential and fostering opportunity. Emily embodied this spirit effortlessly. Though she walked the halls of Westridge Academy, where tuition rivaled mortgages, she wore the simplest school uniform, eschewing any hint of luxury or ostentation. Her small leather-bound notebook, filled with meticulously organized notes and ideas, was her prized possession, more valuable to her than any designer accessory. She had earned her full merit scholarship through sheer intellect and relentless effort. A quiet victory that spoke volumes about her character and resilience. This scholarship was not just financial aid, it was a validation of her promise. A beacon lighting her path toward a future she intended to claim with dignity and determination. Yet, as Emily stood in the cold glare of Hancock Trust, stripped of her papers and dignity, she was painfully reminded that the world outside her home did not always recognize her worth. What made the day's humiliation even more bitter was the knowledge that her father, the very man who had recently acquired Hancock Financial Group and was poised to reshape its future, remained unknown to the employees who doubted her. Emily had chosen to navigate this banking rite of passage on her own, determined to prove her independence. Yet she had unwittingly stepped into a battlefield where prejudice and power played ruthless games. Little did she realize, the day's events were not merely about a check or a misguided suspicion. They were a window into the collision of legacy, ambition, and the undercurrents of corporate treachery that would soon unravel. In the quiet moments between the tremors of injustice, Emily's resolve only deepened. This was more than a transaction, it was a test of identity and integrity. A crucible forging the strength that would carry her beyond the marble floors and whispered judgments toward a reckoning far greater than herself. In the shadowed confines of her lavish office, hidden behind the polished doors of Hancock Trust Bank, Victoria Reynolds orchestrated a betrayal far more sinister than the discrimination she so brazenly wielded on the marble floor below. With every practiced gesture, she revealed herself not just as a ruthless gatekeeper of privilege, but as a pawn in a larger, darker game. The arrival of Harrison Morgan, the impeccably tailored CEO of Meridian Banking Group, signaled a clandestine alliance forged in ambition and greed. Their whispered conversation crackled with the electric tension of conspiracy, the air thick with the scent of corporate espionage. Victoria slid across the desk a manila folder stamped boldly with the word, confidential. Its contents bearing the very lifeblood of her father's empire, client lists, asset valuations, and detailed strategies for acquisition. Harrison's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction as he traced the outlines of financial spreadsheets. The secrets of Hancock Trust laid bare like a blueprint for ruin. Each page turned was a dagger plunged deeper into the trust of the institution Emily's father had painstakingly built from the ground up. The cold calculation in Victoria's voice as she outlined schedules, regulatory loopholes, and staffing plans betrayed a chilling disregard for loyalty or justice. This was no mere business deal, it was a carefully orchestrated coup. A quiet unraveling designed to shatter the legacy of the Johnson family and seize control amid the chaos. As Emily, trapped in the humiliating corner downstairs, silently chronicled every damning detail in her leather-bound notebook, the gravity of betrayal weighed heavily on her young shoulders. The woman who had demeaned her, stolen her documents, and wielded power to oppress was simultaneously dismantling her family's future. Piece by piece, in the very heart of the institution meant to safeguard it, the juxtaposition was stark and suffocating. A young girl held hostage by prejudice and a woman who sold her integrity for profit. Yet beneath the despair, a fierce clarity began to ignite within Emily. This was no longer a moment of victimhood but the genesis of resistance. Fueled by the knowledge that the rot within Hancock Trust ran far deeper than anyone could have imagined. As the hours dragged on within the gleaming halls of Hancock Trust Bank, Emily Johnson's sharp eyes observed a disheartening theater of inequity unfolding around her. A stark tableau that laid bare the insidious machinery of privilege and prejudice operating beneath the polished surface. Customers strolled up to the counters with an air of ease, their transactions met with warm smiles and expedited service. White faces welcomed with familiar nods and courtesies that bordered on reverence. Victoria Reynolds, the architect of Emily's torment, moved among them like a queen among her favored subjects, personally escorting Mr. and Mrs. Anderson to the plush privacy of the bank's VIP lounge, where leather armchairs and silver trays of champagne awaited, symbols of status that were simultaneously a gauntlet thrown at those deemed unworthy. Emily's gaze lingered on the subtle but unmistakable disparities. A young white woman, newly finished with her deposit, was not only walked out with delicate attentiveness but also offered assistance carrying her belongings. Gestures that seemed trivial yet echoed volumes in the quiet cruelty of exclusion. Meanwhile, a Latino couple inquired tentatively about a transaction only to be met with practiced indifference and excuses of a slow system. A delay designed not by technology but by tacit bias. The bank's policies, prominently displayed on the walls, proclaimed fairness and inclusivity. Yet their words rang hollow against the reality Emily meticulously documented in her notebook, each moment of disregard, every dismissive glance, the pattern of privilege as relentless and mechanical as clockwork. Even the most vulnerable, a young white boy breaking free from his mother's grasp to run riot through the lobby, was met with indulgent laughter and a lollipop. A stark contrast to the silent condemnation and suspicion Emily faced simply for existing in that space. The juxtaposition was a daily exhibition of systemic discrimination, a performance where race and wealth dictated the measure of humanity granted by those who wielded power. And as Emily stood rooted in her corner, a silent witness to the choreography of exclusion, her resolve deepened. She was no longer merely a victim but an archivist of injustice, gathering the shards of a fractured system in preparation for the reckoning to come. Amidst the cold indifference that surrounded her, a flicker of unexpected compassion emerged in the figure of Grace Kim, a young Asian American teller whose quiet strength defied the toxic atmosphere permeating Hancock Trust Bank. Observing Emily's prolonged ordeal, the confiscation of her documents, the endless hours spent standing in a barren corner under the scrutinizing gaze of a security guard, Grace felt an unsettling mix of empathy and helplessness welling within her chest. Each glance she cast toward Emily was heavy with unspoken solidarity, a silent rebellion against the injustice that no official channel dared to challenge. As the minutes stretched into hours, Grace wrestled with the risk of crossing invisible lines dictated by the bank's rigid protocols, knowing full well the personal cost that any act of defiance might exact. Yet, her conscience would not allow her to remain a passive bystander. In a moment laden with both urgency and quiet courage, she slipped her own personal cell phone from the depths of her pocket, deftly concealing it beneath a cleaning cloth and a stack of deposit slips. With a glance cast over her shoulder to ensure Victoria Reynolds was occupied, Grace approached Emily's corner and pressed the lifeline into the girl's trembling hands. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, yet monumental, a beacon of hope amid the suffocating isolation. With shaking fingers, Emily grasped the phone as if it were a fragile talisman, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. She dialed her father's number, her whispered pleas cutting through the tension like a lifeline thrown into stormy seas. "Dad, it's me. They won't let me deposit my check. They have my documents." Her voice cracked, the weight of fear and exhaustion raw in every syllable. On the other end, Dr. Michael Johnson's deep, steady voice was a balm, a steadying force that promised swift action and unwavering support. Grace's quiet act of rebellion had transformed despair into connection, desperation into a call for justice. In that fleeting exchange, the rigid walls of the bank seemed momentarily permeable, and Emily's isolation fractured by the simple, profound kindness of a stranger willing to risk everything for what was right. The tension in the bank's grand lobby shifted palpably as the heavy glass doors swung open, announcing the arrival of Dr. Michael Johnson with an unmistakable aura of authority that seemed to still the very air. Towering and composed, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that bespoke both power and purpose, he moved with the assured gait of a man accustomed to commanding rooms without uttering a word. All eyes turned instinctively as he strode past the rows of stunned tellers and bewildered customers, his gaze locking immediately on Emily, still standing weary and constrained in the corner where she had been held captive by prejudice and protocol for nearly 4 agonizing hours. The controlled fire in his eyes spoke volumes, not only of a father's concern but of a titan confronting a breach against everything he stood for. Approaching her, his voice softened to a tender murmur. "Are you all right, Emily?" Yet even as she nodded, exhausted and shaken, the promise of reckoning hung heavy between them. The arrival of Talia Bennett, the regional director, added an unspoken urgency to the moment. Her presence radiated both professionalism and the weight of corporate oversight, signaling that the quiet storm brewing beneath Hancock Trust's polished exterior was about to break wide open. Victoria Reynolds, caught in the throes of a crumbling facade, attempted to maintain control as Dr. Johnson's measured voice cut through the charged atmosphere, accusing with calm but undeniable authority, "You have been holding my daughter against her will." The words reverberated through the bank like thunder, silencing objections and igniting a wave of unease among the assembled staff and customers. Minutes later, the conference room morphed into an impromptu tribunal, the air thick with accusation and anticipation. Security personnel escorted Victoria in handcuffs, the same guard who had once enforced her cruel commands now ensuring her accountability. Even more startling was the apprehension of Harrison Morgan, intercepted and brought before the board as the mastermind from Meridian Banking Group implicated in this sordid affair. Large screens flickered to life, displaying hours of damning security footage, Emily's quiet dignity amid humiliation. Victoria's starkly contrasting treatment of customers along racial lines. And the secretive meeting with Harrison that betrayed a corporate trust meant to be sacrosanct. With painstaking clarity, Emily stood before the room, her voice unwavering as she read from the pages of her notebook, a meticulous chronicle of injustice and treachery that no one could ignore. The room's collective breath caught as Dr. Johnson laid bare the magnitude of the offenses: discrimination, betrayal, and espionage, woven into a tapestry of corruption that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the bank. Victoria's desperate attempts to justify her actions with claims of protocol fell on deaf ears, met instead with the icy condemnation of those who demanded justice. In the crescendo of the hearing, the weight of truth crushed pretense, and the fate of the guilty was sealed. What had begun as a day of quiet banking transformed irrevocably into a dramatic reckoning, a stark declaration that privilege and prejudice would no longer dictate the fate of those who walked through Hancock Trust's doors. The aftermath of the turbulent day unfolded like the turning of a page in a long overdue chapter of reckoning and reform within the hallowed halls of Hancock Trust Bank. The once imposing figure of Victoria Reynolds, stripped of her carefully constructed veneer of power, was led away under the cold gaze of security, her steps heavy with the weight of disgrace and the grim reality of impending legal consequences. Harrison Morgan, too, faced the crushing fall from grace, his confident stride replaced by cautious, measured steps as he confronted charges of corporate espionage that echoed far beyond the polished marble floors he once prowled. Yet amid the ruins of betrayal and the ashes of broken trust, seeds of hope began to take root. Grace Kim, whose quiet courage had bridged the chasm between oppression and justice, found herself recognized not only for her bravery but for embodying the very soul of integrity that Hancock Trust desperately needed. Promoted to a role where she could shape the future, Grace led initiatives to retrain staff, championing a culture of equity and respect that aimed to dismantle the systemic barriers that had long festered unchecked. The bank itself became a battleground for transformation, its conference rooms now sites of learning rather than conspiracy, where employees absorbed lessons in empathy, accountability, and the profound power of inclusive service. Meanwhile, Emily Johnson emerged from the shadows of humiliation not as a mere survivor but as a beacon of change and empowerment. Standing before audiences of students and community members alike, her poised voice carried the message that financial literacy was not a privilege reserved for the elite, but a fundamental right, an instrument of power and possibility accessible to all. Regardless of age, background, or circumstance, the echoes of that fateful day reverberated far beyond the bank's walls, inspiring movements toward fairness in financial institutions and sparking dialogues about race, privilege, and justice in spaces where silence had once reigned. In the quiet moments of reflection shared between father and daughter, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that the greatest victories often arise from the crucible of adversity, and that true leadership is forged not in comfort, but in the unwavering pursuit of what is right. The story of Emily Johnson's harrowing ordeal at Hancock Trust Bank and the subsequent upheaval that rocked its very foundation stands as a powerful testament to the enduring struggle for justice and equality in a world too often shadowed by prejudice and corruption. It reveals how the corrosive forces of discrimination, subtle yet pervasive, can infiltrate even the most polished institutions, undermining the very principles they claim to uphold. Yet, within this narrative of injustice lies a profound message of resilience and transformation. Emily's steadfast courage in the face of humiliation, the quiet heroism of Grace Kim's defiant kindness, and the unyielding resolve of Dr. Michael Johnson to confront and dismantle systemic wrongs underscore a universal truth: that the arc of justice bends not by chance but through the deliberate actions of those who dare to stand against the tide. This story is more than a recounting of a single day's events. It is a clarion call for vigilance, accountability, and the ceaseless pursuit of equity in all corners of society. It challenges each of us to examine the biases we harbor, the systems we tolerate, and the voices we choose to amplify or silence. Most importantly, it affirms the power that lies within individuals, regardless of age, race, or station, to ignite change that reverberates far beyond their own lives. In the gleam of Hancock Trust's restored corridors, where new policies foster inclusivity and respect, and where Emily's voice now inspires countless others. We find not only redemption but hope. Hope that through courage, empathy, and unwavering commitment, the shadows of injustice can be dispelled, making way for a future where dignity and fairness are the birthright of all who dare to walk through the doors of opportunity.